Большое спасибо, я благодарю за приглашение, участвую в этой конференции с большим удовольствием. Не только потому, что мы здесь рассуждаем очень важные проблемы, но тоже потому, что я здесь встречаю группу друзей и партнеров, с которыми мне приходилось сотрудничать на прошлом, обыкновенно неплохо сотрудничать. И надеюсь, что это может помочь нам лучше пониматься тоже сегодня. Now, getting to the substance, I would like to start with saying that, in my opinion, relations between the Western democracies and Russia are probably the worst in the last 40 years. This applies to security issues, economy, relationships between the societies, and rivalry in information and propaganda. A negative view presented in Russia includes lack of respect from the West, as well as systematic surrounding of Russia by the West, guided by the evil intentions. I do not know whether Russian leaders proclaiming such theses believe in them themselves, or whether they treat them merely as a useful pretext to justify their own policies. I have no doubt, however, that this reasoning is totally unfounded. Until the breakout of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the West did not have any tendency to act to the detriment of Russia. Perhaps President Obama's words about Russia being a regional power rather than global one were slightly inappropriate because, although it is true, we do not always have to remind others publicly about our faults and weaknesses. The West has always had and still has a strategic interest in cooperation with Russia, particularly in the areas of economy and security. Objectively speaking, it seems that Russia has the same interest in relations with the West. In Western societies, there has never been any interest in conflict with Russia or any permission for a military conflict with this country. Moreover, no government has ever sought such consent or had such intentions. What in Russia is considered surrounding is due to natural and rightful decisions of some of Russia's neighbors to align themselves with the structures and institutions of the West, or it may be due to threats to international security, as for example in the case of Afghanistan. Incidentally, the use of the example of Afghanistan as a proof of the aggressive nature of NATO is simply cynical. There would be no problem with Taliban if not for the aggression of the USSR in 1979. Soldiers of the NATO countries serving and often dying in Afghanistan equally defend our common security, including the security of Russia. So, what are the reasons behind the current collapse of the cooperation between the West and Russia? In my opinion, they mainly result from the behavior, decisions, and new foreign policy of Russia. It is the Russian authorities that have made the choice between modernization of the economy and the state and the militarization and confrontation with the West. Why did they choose militarization and confrontation instead of modernization? In my opinion, the answer lies in the domestic politics of Russia and not in its relations with the West. The Russian doctrine, based on the assumption that Moscow has special rights in the neighborhood, is illegal and unacceptable, as it is challenging the sovereignty of other countries. As a consequence, it has resulted in the intervention in Ukraine, which has evolved into an overt aggression in Crimea and the attempt of unlawful seizure of this territory. This has led to a completely new situation in which there is no easy way out. The West cannot accept this state of affairs, not only because of its own interests, but also because of its own identity. The European Union will cease to be a political community and lose the right to make any statements about principles and values if it consents to the Russian aggression in Europe. Russia, of course, may be able to succeed with intimidation or corrupting of individual countries, governments, and politicians, but if that happens, it will be a disaster for Europe. So the future of the Crimea and Donetsk is not the only thing at stake in this grim game, but it is also the future of Europe. Europeans that are aware of this have no choice. They have to defend themselves against such a scenario, and that means a very narrow range of possible flexibility. Both sides suffer economic losses, although the losses of the Russian side are obviously more severe and have a greater direct and indirect impact. This includes smaller chance of modernization of the economy, financial constraints, decline in GDP growth, signifying the rapid increase of gap between Russia and other economic powers, and the risk of losing markets and suppliers. Russia has lost the ability to pressure Europe using the argument of energy resources, and its situation is going to continue to deteriorate in the future. Europe will simply turn to other suppliers in this sector in mid- and long-term perspective. The troubles which afflict Europe with regards to the immigrants crisis or the financial situation of some of the member states can have different effects on policy towards Russia. Perhaps should a realistic argument about the need to minimize the number of conflicts by turning a blind eye to the actions of Russia will triumph, but it is possible that there will be a consolidation and discipline of the community in the face of various threats. So the Russian tactics aimed at breaking the unity of Europe is risky. What are the possible ways out? I want to present 4 points. First, Russia should, within a short time frame, withdraw from the eastern Ukraine and establish a close cooperation with Kiev, aimed at the reconstruction of Donbass, the return of refugees, and the restoration of normal functioning of the economy. Second, the annexation of the Crimea cannot be accepted, and the Crimea region must be returned in the future. But given the current political reality, this issue should probably be frozen for now. Third, Russia must end with aggressive foreign policy and constant provocation, which pose a threat of accidental armed conflict with the West. Contacts and agreements at the level of representatives of the military structures of NATO and Russia should be quickly established. And finally, if all that happens in the new situation, the conditions for discussion and the adoption of the concept of strategic cooperation between the West and Russia will be established. Thank you very much.